Hi, it's Anna. Welcome back to Books on the Go. And this is part 2 of my belated November wrap up. So this is the non-fiction part. And I'll start with How to Be a Dictator. What a title. The Cult of Personality in the 20th Century by Dikötter. And so quite, in some ways, a depressing read, but really fascinating, especially for someone like me who I have gaps in my knowledge of history. And this gives you, it goes from Mussolini to Stalin to Mao Zedong, Kim Il-sung, Mengistu, and a couple of others. But it gives you a sort of a potted history of those countries through that lens of the periods of time they've been ruled by dictators and the different styles that they've each used, the way that they have got the people to obey them or to fall into line, sometimes through having a cult of personality and other times just by sheer force. And it's really fascinating. There are also some commonalities that you notice through all of them. So they're often, I made some notes as I was reading, they're often grandiose, narcissistic, self-absorbed, needy people, and cruel and violent in many cases. And the thing that makes you sad, I suppose, as you read it, is that they leave the country worse off than when they came to power. So the countries have then gone through poverty and famine, and all for the sake of this man having power. So it's really good, succinct history. So I recommend it for that reason. And again, it just for those gaps in your knowledge, and to put it in context, when you see them lined up one after the other, you sort of think, yes, there are some common themes amongst them. But yeah, it'd be interesting to sort of do that, and then from a modern day perspective, or to see how it compares to today, or what can we learn from this, or to sort of go to the next step and say, if we agree that it doesn't serve a country to be ruled by someone of these types of people, how do we prevent that? Or I don't know. I'd be interested to know what the follow-up would be, other than just leaving us with this sort of depressing picture. But that is a really interesting book. And then I read The Truths We Hold, An American Journey by Kamala Harris. And this was around the time of the election. So it's hard to believe November, the election was happening at the beginning of the month. That feels so long ago now. But I was really intrigued by Kamala Harris, and I wanted to get a bit of a sense of her story. There's also a very good podcast, and I think it's called Next in Line, and it's Kamala Harris's story, and I recommend that as well. But this was really good. It's easy to read, and it gives you her viewpoint on different issues. So each chapter, I think, has an issue connected with it, and it also gives you a sense of her as a person and her tenacity, intelligence, and her sort of ambition, and where she's come from, her family, and all of those things. So it's quite heartwarming. It gives you a bit of hope in the future, because she's comes across as a very competent, switched on, no-nonsense leader, and that's a positive. After How to Be a Dictator especially, that's a positive, hopeful message, but it's also very interesting on some of the issues, and also behind the scenes of some of her campaigns. So I recommend that. That is The Truths We Hold. And then I was on a real non-fiction binge in November. Rebel Ideas by Syed, The Power of Diverse Thinking. So this is another one that's been on my shelf for a while, and I've been meaning to get to it. Very, very good. He starts off with a really interesting story about 9/11 and how the CIA or the FBI, I think it's the CIA, but how the American sort of government missed the cues and the messages about Al-Qaeda, and the fact that Osama bin Laden had posted a video and they didn't view it as significant. And the reason was that no one in the room had a Muslim background, or a background that would pick up on the clues that, he had a beard, he was in a cave, all these things that they thought, they dismissed it as, small time sort of home video, and he explains how if you had someone who understood that culture, they would be able to tell you that this is something we need to take seriously. And so they missed a chance to get on top of that before 9/11. So that's the sort of the premise, that's the opening story. And then it's really interesting all about the power of having a diverse group of people when you're brainstorming or making decisions in all sorts of different contexts. And so it does change the way you think. Some of it might be sort of common knowledge now, but the reasons behind it and the impact and the examples are very powerful. So I really enjoyed this. That's Rebel Ideas. I recommend that. Especially if you're in a work context, if you have to put teams together or you have to hire or recruit people, it informs that really well. So the next one is Calypso by David Sedaris. So again, has been on my shelf for over a year and I finally got to it. And this, I have to say, when I was doing a lot of visits to hospital and Dad was very unwell, and this was just what I needed to be reading, this misanthropic view of life, but deadpan humour. And it was just exactly, what I needed. Someone telling me the stories of his life. It's like having a friend sit down and just say, right, well, you wouldn't guess what's happened to me. Right, well, I bought a Fitbit, but of course I'm now walking 60,000 kilometres a day. And just the completely dry delivery, it really was great company. It was just what I felt like reading. So I didn't know what to expect because I've heard that he's super funny and a lot of people love his writing. And then I've heard another friend just say they found it a bit snarky or they didn't quite get on with it. So I went in with no expectations, but enjoyed it hugely. So that was Calypso by David Sedaris. Also for non-fiction November, I read The Undoing Project by Michael Lewis, and this again has been on the shelf. So I'm really working through my TBR this month, and I love Michael Lewis's work. So I've read, I think, all of his books. I just find him so engaging, so funny, really intelligent, and he could write about, I think, any subject, and I'd find it interesting because he has such a good way of telling a story. He makes everything into a narrative and he makes it about the characters and he just draws you in, and he's got a great sense of humour. So I was excited to read this. It was not my favourite of his books. It's the story of two psychologists, Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, and they wrote the book, or one of them, I think maybe just Daniel Kahneman wrote the book Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And so they're psychologists who started looking into how we think, how we make decisions, the unconscious biases that we have and the systemic biases, and the fact that what we think is our intuition and that we should rely on our intuition often is flawed, and that data can be more reliable than our sort of personal judgment, which is counterintuitive in some ways. And we don't like to see decision making to computers or to data, but it's interesting, and it goes to their approach. And this is one of the captivating things about them, or one of the compelling things about the book, is that they are both such original thinkers. And by that I mean they think for themselves, and when they are presented with a problem, they will just go back to first principles and think, what do I think is the answer, or is that even the right question, and so on. And they think for themselves as opposed to applying the sort of conventional wisdom. And that, of course, is a form of genius, and it's a very powerful way to come up with new ideas and to forge your way in the world. And so I loved reading about that, and he does it as always so well. But then I don't know, I didn't always quite understand their theories, and even when they give the examples of the tests, and would you want 50 of this or 2 of that, or what if it was 2 of that and 50 of that, or whatever, I wasn't even answering them in the same way as he said the majority do. So I was never as drawn in as perhaps others are to the ideas that they were proposing. And then there was a lot about their relationship and the dynamic between them and the jealousies and the egos and all of that, and I really lost patience with that. I was not as interested in, you know, whether one of them was jealous of the other or was getting the attention that they thought they deserved, or which professor, you know, whether they got their job as a professor of Stanford or Yale or whichever university. That was less interesting for me, but as always, really easy to read, really engaging. So I think I was judging it. It's interesting when you try to give a rating, for example, on Goodreads. I'm judging it by the Michael Lewis standard, but by any other standard, it would be, you know, a 5-star read. But because it's Michael Lewis and I loved his other books, I don't put it up there. But anyway, let me know if you have read it and what you thought. So that's The Undoing Project. So that was November, a big non-fiction November. I'd love to hear what you've been reading, and I can't believe we're actually near the end of December now, so I'm very behind with my wrap-ups. But anyway, we'll get there. Have a great festive season, and love to hear what you've been reading or what you're reading over the holidays, if you have a holiday. And I will see you soon. Bye for now.